Right, so this is the second of two videos about chapter 10. So we'll get through chapter 10 pretty quickly this week in the videos. Here we'll go through more specific frameworks for how to do job analysis. So conventional job analysis is generally what we teach in HR classes. And when I say generally, I mean I teach this, for example, in my introduction to HR class. This is based on the U.S. Employment Service approach that was developed in the kind of early to mid 20th century. And it really focuses on work activity. So that's why a lot of times when we've talked about job analysis in the past and the way that we use job analysis in HR, we're really focused on the kinds of tasks that people do as part of their work. A lot of this includes observation and interviews, which are two of the most common ways of collecting information, either with incumbents who are in that job already, with supervisors who supervise people in those jobs, or people who work with people in those jobs, like their coworkers or colleagues on teams, or with stakeholders, or stakeholders could be customers, clients, people inside of the organization that rely on this job to get their own work done. That's how we can collect information about the tasks that are done in this job. Sometimes this also ends up, or it traditionally used to end up as an essay format. Most of the time now, I would say it doesn't always end up in an essay format for the job description, but it was a very detailed job description then about what people were doing and all of the tasks that they were doing and what they needed to do those tasks. The strengths in the conventional job analysis, and the reason that we teach it is that it's very detailed. And for a lot of students, that's really what they're missing when they do their first few job analyses is just the amount of detail that you need to describe a job. You need that much detail, especially in the purposes that we'll use it for in this class, because you have to be able to differentiate that job from another job within the organization. If you can't differentiate jobs, there's no reason that those jobs couldn't be merged together into a specific job or position. They also are pretty comprehensive then, showing all of the things that someone could do as part of their job, even if some of those things are things that they only do occasionally, like every quarter or every year. However, the limitations in this job approach is that because you're using observation in interviews, it can be very subjective based on what people either tell you in the interviews or what you actually see in the observations. And especially if you have a job where people don't do the same thing from day to day, the observations can be biased in the sense of what you saw or whoever was doing the observation saw as part of the job analysis, and then what didn't happen when they weren't observing that is still part of the job. It also can be very time consuming. Interviews take a while, but observation takes even longer. So if you want to observe someone, you might have to spend a day or days observing them in their job. Another really popular approach, one that we teach, but I don't really have a great example of, is the position analysis questionnaire or PAQ. And the reason I don't have a good example of what this looks like is that the PAQ is copyrighted. So you can't just pull questions, like you couldn't go to Google and just pull questions. You actually have to buy the PAQ from the company that creates it in order to use it for job analysis. However, they've done a lot of testing on the PAQ and it's been used across lots of organizations. So they actually have reliability and validity statistics that some of these other methods don't always have because it's used in a very specific way and because the company that has created the PAQ has controlled like its use and also data collection around its use to get those statistics for us. The PAQ is a structured questionnaire. It has 194 job elements. And remember from the previous video, the elements are even smaller than tasks. So these are very detailed questions about someone's job and the things they could be doing in that job. It's a worker-oriented approach because it's usually the worker in that job who fills this out, although other people like a supervisor could fill it out for that worker as well. It divides information into 6 categories. One is information input. So what kind of information are people using in their in data are they using in their job? What mental processes do they have to use to manipulate that data or use it in some way for the job that they're in? What is their work output? And their work output could be products, it could be services, it could be knowledge, for example. What relationships do they have within the workplace that might be important to their job? In what context are they working? Are they working in an office? Do they work outside? Are they working on a computer? That sort of thing. And then what other characteristics do we need to know about this job to differentiate it from other jobs? The advantage of the PAQ compared to all of the other techniques I'm going to talk about or frameworks is that you can use this you can analyze this data quantitatively. So you can compare jobs quantitatively. Like you would have numbers that help you differentiate jobs from one another. And that analysis can also help differentiate jobs in different categories of tasks, or even if you wanted to go down to the element level, to start differentiating jobs. Remember though, the lower the level you use to differentiate jobs, the more differentiation you'll get, but the less similarity you'll have across jobs, which can affect how you create your compensation structure, compensation system later. The one kind of big drawback about the PAQ is not only is it kind of expensive to use in the sense that you have to buy the instrument, but it also is written at a college graduate reading level. So a reading level of someone who's graduated college. So what happens a lot is when organizations use the PAQ, their HR employees or managers have to help people, or a lot of employees use this because they don't have the appropriate reading level to actually do the questionnaire on their own. The functional job analysis is another way that we can go about doing job analysis. And this looks at data, people, and things in a hierarchy. Our textbook has a really good picture of what the hierarchies look like. So it's trying to differentiate the way that you use data, the kinds of interactions you have with people, and the things that you make or do in that job through these hierarchies. This particular job analysis framework has 5 components. It wants to describe the purpose or goals for the things that people do in their job. It wants task descriptions, task analysis, goes beyond the task description to describe how you do the task. Performance standards, so what is, really an excellent job versus a good job versus mediocre or not meeting standards. And then it also talks about training content. How do you know how to learn to do that job? The work activity becomes the primary descriptor, so it's very similar to the conventional job analysis that we teach across different classes, but it is very time intensive to do this because you're trying to describe tasks and do analysis on tasks, and there are many, many tasks for most jobs. It also is pretty rigorous, so if you can do this, you have you have a lot of details to help differentiate jobs, but also through the task analysis, you can see where jobs are similar as well. We also have the comprehensive data analysis program. This is usually used in the military and the federal government. It's called CODAP. And what they do is they do a task inventory approach. So somewhat similar to some of these others that focus on work activities. It's a quantitative job analysis. And you can see this, like if you look at a federal job schedule, for example, and you see the different kinds of jobs and the levels those jobs are at, you can see how you could use a quantitative job analysis, because if you're in the military, a lot of the jobs are going to be quite similar in the sense that they do similar things, but what differentiates them might be their level of responsibility or the knowledge, skills, or experience they have to do those jobs. It's the same in the federal government. There's lots of different jobs, but within an agency, a lot of the jobs might be quite similar. And so it can be easy then to create a quantitative job analysis by looking at the differences and similarities in the jobs and the job groups that exist within those agencies. Because it's a quantitative job analysis, it's keeping data in a way that we can do statistical analysis on it. So in that sense, it's a lot like the PAQ. And it's really best for large organizations where you have lots of different jobs and you might have lots of different positions within different jobs that you can aggregate as part of your statistical analysis to sort of figure out what are the similarities and differences across the different jobs that we have within the organization. And then the thing that I'm going to have you use for your activity is ONET. This is the Occupational Information Network. This is a super great database. It's very comprehensive about different occupations, and it really breaks things down into like tasks, the knowledge, skills, and abilities you need. I wanted to show you a few features on this. So let me see if I can switch out the what I'm sharing. So I'm going to share a different screen. Let me pull that up. Hopefully you'll be able to see this. This is ONET online. It's www.onetonline.org. If you just go to Google and put in ONET, it'll find it pretty easily for you. Sometimes when I forget what it is, that's just what I do. So let's put in, you can see this is the initial page. It's much handier if you just put in a job and try to figure out what that job does. So I'm going to put in industrial engineer just because I used it as an example in the first video. And then you can see where it has codes that match industrial engineer, and it gets into a lot of detail. So if you know specifically what the position looks like, you can get something more specific than just industrial engineer. I don't have a specific job in mind, so I'm just going to go to industrial engineer, but let me show you what's in here. If any of you have taken my intro to HR class, you've seen this before. If you haven't, then if you've never seen ONET, you'll find it very, very handy. And it's handy for both you as an HR employee or as a manager who might be hiring employees. It's also handy for people who are looking for jobs, and I'll show you how. So we've got a brief description here of what an industrial engineer does, and then some sample job titles. This is really helpful for you if you're looking for a job to figure out what that job title might mean, because sometimes a job title, something like continuous improvement engineer, you may or may not realize that's the same as an industrial engineer. That's just a specific title for that position in a certain organization. They also can give you other jobs that might be similar to this job that you might want to look at as well in terms of the description, especially if you're trying to write a job description and you want to be comprehensive. So the summary has lots of tasks. There's usually a ton of tasks. Right here, they're just showing 5 of 20. If you click it, they'll bring up all of the tasks. This is very helpful for writing a job description. It'll talk about technology skills that you need. And then of course there are more than that. Here, this might be very specific, like I've heard of MATLAB, I've never used it, for example, but if you were an engineer, you'd know exactly what that was and that is something you need to know for this job, for example. It also displays work activities. So what are the things that you're doing? Not necessarily specific tasks. Tasks are things like what you're doing that usually has some kind of output for it, output to it. A work activity can have output, but it's usually the things that you're just doing during the day. So things like using a computer, or using spreadsheets, making math calculations, that sort of thing. You also can have detailed work activities. This can be very helpful when you have to write very specific task descriptions. You can use both the work activities and the detailed work activities to describe what someone will be doing to complete that task. Work context tells us a little bit about what kind of context the person's working in. Do they use a computer? What do they have to talk with people or interact with people on teams, that sort of thing. And then we have job zone, which gives us examples of the different kinds of knowledge, skills, and abilities that are needed for this specific job. So this can be helpful if you're writing a job description as part of a job in HR. You may not be very familiar with that job or job family. This can be very helpful to figure out what are the necessary knowledge, skills, and abilities we might need for this job, and then what would be ideal. So here, for example, it looks like a bachelor's degree is often required, but not always required. So that might be helpful to understand in your specific context in your organization. If you have to write an industrial engineer position description, do you need to say that you require the bachelor's, or is it an ideal requirement for the job? We also can get training and credentials. This can be very helpful. For example, if we look up Kansas, I actually don't know if there are training credentials needed for industrial engineering, but here, because it has just a bachelor's degree, it can tell us which programs across the state, including Kansas State University, have these programs. And then here it tells us how many graduates are in those programs. If you are someone who is doing a workforce analysis, for example, this could be really helpful to figure out, okay, who in our state might be graduating with this degree that could do this specific job, just to get a sense of what does that workforce look like and how can I plan for either having a surplus of people out in that workforce or not having enough people, and knowing that I might have to go recruit from other states to get the kinds of people I need in this job. You also can look up local training and state licenses that are needed, apprenticeship opportunities that you could provide to help people learn this. And then the specific knowledge, skills, and abilities is here in the worker requirements. We call this the specifications or job specifications on a job description. So the specific skills, knowledge, and then the education that people have. I find this very useful because this percentage, for example, tells you something about how often a bachelor's degree is needed for this job. If you didn't know this, you could say, okay, it's pretty safe for us to say that we need a bachelor's degree in industrial engineering for the specific occupation or for the specific position within our organization. And then here's the abilities you need to have to do this. This interest is related to some of the theories about career interests. And you can actually do Here, an ONET interest profiler. We also have some, if anyone's interested in doing this, I just learned about some tools that we have at the university, and as College of Business students, they're eligible and completely free for all of you. If you are interested in exploring your interests, or say you've had a job for some time and you're kind of interested in exploring other jobs or that you might be interested in and you might have knowledge, skills, and abilities for, let me know and I can provide you with that information. If I can get that to you all next week sometime, I'll try to make a list of some of those tools that are available. I just learned about some of them from our career coaches, and they look really cool. And since it's free to all of you, you should use it as you can. But that's where this interest inventories comes from. They're from these theories about what kinds of interests lead to which kinds of careers that people might be satisfied in. Similar for work values, there's theories around what kinds of work values people would want to have in these kinds of jobs. Could be useful for writing a job description. Work styles, similarly, that's another theory-based idea about getting work. And then here's where I think this is super useful for those of you who might be looking for jobs in the near future. You can get a sense of the median wages. And this is based on Department of Labor data. So the kind of data that the government uses to figure out like not only how much people are paid in their jobs, but unemployment rates and the number of jobs that we even have in this specific category of jobs within the United States. This is the same data that's collected from organizations. We can also look up state wages. So we could look up in Kansas. So it's $101,000 annually for median wages across the US. In Kansas, it's a little lower, which is often expected here because the standard of living is a little bit lower, and it can compare the US to Kansas. So if the job that you have is specific to Kansas, this might be helpful once we go into creating our compensation system to figure out how much we're going to pay for this kind of job. You can see how many people were employed in this job, and then it's projected growth, which could be very helpful for you in figuring out what kind of job you want. This one's going to grow much faster than average, so that's good if you're in this kind of area. And then you can also look for job openings and related occupations, professional associations. This can also be useful in writing a job description because you may want people who either are members of specific associations, or you may want to pay for their membership once they have a job in your organization, or you may be looking for certain kinds of certifications that they could have for that job. So that is ONET. I'm going to have you use it this week for writing a job description. Super handy, super useful. You can also go through there's lots of clickable information in here. So please check that out on your own time as well. Let me go back to the PowerPoint. It may start from the beginning. Yeah, it's going to start from the beginning. Let me get down to the slide that we were on. All right, so using ONET, we're going to write job descriptions, and your job description would include all the information you've collected in your job analysis. There's a standardized format, and I'm going to show you how you can see a standardized format and examples. Our book gives one example, but I think visually I want to see what a real job description looks like when I'm writing them. So your sections generally are going to be identification of that job, so like the specific information about that specific position. The work performed, so this is the tasks and the summary of that job. And then the performance requirements or job specifications. What are the knowledge, skills, and abilities people need to do those jobs? Before we get into showing you some job descriptions, let me realize I forgot to make this in presentation mode. Here we go. To write a job description, you want to use a direct style, present tense with active verbs, clear objectives for each task, specific unambiguous language, and proper organization and formatting. You can think of this as like writing a resume. A resume is simply a resource or almost like a reply to a job description. So you're going to write the job description the way you would write a resume or a cover letter. It's a conversation that's happening between the organization that has a job and a potential job candidate. Another thing I'm going to have you do is I don't want you to use artificial intelligence or any kind of AI to write your job description for this week's activity because I want you to learn the parts of that job description and how to put them together by doing it. But I'm not going to ask for like a full job description. I'm only going to ask for, I think, 5 to 8 tasks and that sort of thing. So it's sort of an abbreviated job description. But in real life, well, a lot of HR managers and anyone who's actually involved in hiring, so hiring managers and any HR staff, They're going to be using AI to fix up a job description once they've written it, or to even have AI pull that information from ONET and try to write a draft job description that they can work from. It depends on where you work, how they're going to use AI in that process, but this is a process where AI is used a lot now for HR. The other thing I want to mention is for managerial job descriptions, you're going to have more information that you need to provide than just those three elements. You're going to have an expanded identification section because you have to relate this job to the hierarchy of jobs within the organization. And that includes scope data, like what are they responsible for in terms of finances, organizationally, where do they fit into the organization? Are they the head of a department? Are they heading up teams? That sort of thing. You have to put in reporting relationships. For everyone, you will put in who they report to, but with a manager, you also have to write who reports to them, and you may even have to describe who reports to the people that report to that manager, depending on what level they're at. What are their budget responsibilities? Do they actually write the budget? Do they have some influence on the budget, or are they simply implementing a budget that's been approved elsewhere in the organization? And then there's supposed to be a focus on organizational objectives at the managerial level because that's sort of the point of a manager is to help oversee employees who are helping meet those organizational objectives through their jobs. So let me show you how to find some good examples of job descriptions that you can use for your assignment. So I'm going to go share another screen. I'm going to go back to the internet. So let me um, go to Handshake. Handshake is available to all of you. If you haven't ever used it, it's actually the way that people who are getting internships or looking for internships or jobs when they're graduating, this is how K-State students can find employers who are looking for employees or for interns. And all you have to do, what I do is I just go to Google and I put in K-State Handshake. I can never remember the actual URL for Handshake, but once you get into it, you'll do the student login. It'll ask you for verification that you're at K-State, and then you'll have something like this. Let me go to the Explore tab. I don't have my whole profile set up because I'm not looking for a job. I just use this to give examples in class and also to kind of when students want a sense of what it's looking like for the job outlooks, for example, for graduating in May. Sometimes I'll go to Handshake and kind of look it over and just see what are people posting. So here I've just said, oh, I would like some human resource positions, different kinds in the Kansas City area. You can put in whatever you want. If there are specific jobs you're looking for or interested in looking at, definitely look at those. They should all have, or most of them will have a predetermined structure for their job description because these are used for legal reasons. For example, when we have to do compliance. So most people write them, or most organizations write them in the same way. So I just clicked on this one from Burrell Behavioral Health. It has the name of the position. And here, Handshake will also tell you how long it's been posted. That can be very helpful, as well as how to actually apply for them. A job description may or may not tell you much about how much it's paying. Some states require it and some don't. And the research shows that many job candidates find it very helpful for at least a range to be put on here. So here they put a range of what they're looking for, how much they're going to pay for this specific job, and then also some of the benefits that they provide. But that is not required as part of a job description in most places. They tell you exactly where you'll be located. So they have two offices in Kansas City or Harrisonville in Missouri, and that you're going to work in person from one of those locations. So there's not any remote work going on in this job. This is a full-time job, and you have to be able, here they actually didn't specify whether you have to be able to work in the US or not. Many jobs you will have to already be authorized to work in the US. There are a limited number of work visas that organizations can apply for each year, but there's so few that a lot of organizations don't have access to that unless they have a very specific need, where someone like an immigrant is the only person who could fill that need. But here's the real job description here. It gives the job title, location, department. This is sort of the information about the job that you have to provide on the very top that describes that job. There's even more information here. And then we get into the job summary. A job summary is just a few sentences. Here it's a few small, short paragraphs describing what the job is. And what they've also done here, and is very common in job descriptions, is they provide some information about the organization itself, sort of what are the values of that organization, how do they stand out from others in their industry. So here they're talking about their benefits, for example, that they're located in very good communities that have good schools and that sort of thing. So this is a way that they're trying to attract people by talking about their employer brand. That's what we call it here, to say there's a reason that you would want to work for us versus our competitors. So think about applying to our jobs. Then they have some of the perk and benefits. This is also part of them trying to build up that employer brand. And then the key responsibilities here are the tasks that are part of that job. And so you can see that they have like a very short title, and then they describe exactly what that task looks like in the organization. This is about as long as I want you to write for your assignment for this week as well, so nothing super long. Here are the specifications, so your education and experience qualifications, and then they also have additional qualifications. These are things that are not related to education or experience, but you have to be able to do this job. So for example, here you have to have a valid driver's license and a reliable vehicle. You're likely going out to clients' homes or places where you can meet with the client to do either an assessment or some kind of treatment. And then they have other things that would be an ONET, for example, like communication and interpersonal skills that would be required to do this job well. And here, this is more information. This is not usually in the job description, but if you ever want to use Handshake to look for a job, it also has more information like this. So that can be very helpful for you as well. So you can use the example that's in the textbook for this week's sort of assignment instead of the quiz that we usually have. Or you can just go to Handshake or other job boards online and just look at the way that they put together the job description. I'm going to be looking for certain elements in that job description. That's at the bottom of the assignment. Once you go to the quiz for this week, that's the assignment for this week. But other than that, you can be as creative as you want in writing this job description or organizing the elements. This is generally the way they're organized. That's like even in this job ad, but you can add information if you want to be more specific as well.